Through much of Red Dead Redemption, you feel powerful and fearless. You're John Marston, badass outlaw with a heart of gold, capable of killing hundreds of men with just a 6-shooter, a rifle, and some cover. There's nothing to be afraid of in Red Dead Redemption, or is there? There are some places in the West where that feeling of power is replaced, if only for a moment, by a feeling of uncertainty, restlessness, and a creeping dread. This is James from Cass, and these are some of the creepiest locations and encounters in Red Dead Redemption. Tumbleweed is probably the first place you thought of when you saw creepy locations in Red Dead Redemption. The first thing you probably want to hear about Tumbleweed is that the town is haunted. It's a real life ghost town, except that it's not. That's just a rumour going around to protect the gang of bandits that have set up shop there. So Marston goes in and clears out the bandits, who have been using ghost stories to keep away any meddling bystanders. But once he does, things get very strange. There is a sound of a dog barking, but never any dog. The dog barking seems to originate from a nearby graveyard, but there's still no dog in sight. And that's not the only place where you can hear things that aren't actually there. The giant abandoned mansion has all the markings of a haunted house. Stay in the mansion long enough and you'll begin to hear voices. There are clearly whispers, murmurs, and bits of conversation. Are those footprints on the stairs? And then there's the note written into the preacher's pulpit at the church that says the devil has gotten into that beast. Is this referring to the dog you can never find, or something else? There is no hard evidence of actual paranormal activity in Tumbleweed, at least nothing that people can prove. Newspapers all over New Austin document the strange happenings in Tumbleweed, and people throughout the region talk about disappearances and screaming coming from the town. With so many unexplained things going on in this ghost town, can they really all be a coincidence? Marston seems like a man with a good heart, so it's easy to forget his streak as a cold-blooded killer. And if he reawakens that side of him, he can make his own personal Tumbleweed. See, the frontier isn't exactly crawling with expendable people. Most settlements only have a few dozen people living in them, and Marston can kill a few dozen people without batting an eye, but usually they'll shoot at him first. But what happens if Marston just rides up into a town and goes on an absolute rampage, killing every single living thing in that town? Men, women, horses, dogs, even chickens? Eventually, they'll stop coming. Forever. Marston can literally wipe out an entire town and it will stay empty, and there is no way of respawning or repopulation. Marston can choke the life out of a settlement with his own hands and it will stay dead. On the way to the Serendipity, the situation is quite tense. Marston doesn't like Edgar Ross and the feeling is mutual, but Ross holds all the cards in this relationship. So when Ross says it's time to drive out to the Serendipity and wipe out the rest of Dutch's gang, Marston has no choice but to comply.
No one's playing games with you, Mr. Marston. But if we were to play some games, there'd be some interesting ones we could play.
Thanks, sir.
Like hanging you for murder, or confiscating all of your property, like that little farm of yours, or having you put in an electric chair. Those are the sort of games we could play. But we choose to play a different game. So calm down and play along with us.
With this, things are already unfriendly, and being forcefully manipulated into a mission is a bad feeling, but at least the end is in sight.
We still don't have Vanderlyn, but now we know where he is.
Then go and shoot him.
No, sir. I want you to shoot him for me. And then I'll let you be.
With that promise in mind, Marston prepares to take on the entirety of Dutch's gang at the wreck of the Serendipity riverboat. But when he gets there, things are quiet. Far, far too quiet for a final showdown. There is nobody in sight, but there is someone in earshot. This is obviously a trap. Everyone knows it's a trap, including Marston himself. But he doesn't get the opportunity to say no here, so he walks up to the top of the wrecked ship and finds a hooded figure tied to a chair. The source of the screaming was a half-dead Native American man, and now the trap has been sprung. From here, he has to fight for both of their lives, just so that he can go back to taking orders from Ross. You don't have to worry about ghosts or anything supernatural while you're wandering around Rio Bravo. In fact, there are very few actual people around in Rio Bravo, much less ghosts. But that's not the problem here. The problem in Rio Bravo is something else that you can't see. Something that stalks you from the heavy brush, only revealing itself when it's too late to protect yourself. That's right, we're talking about the cougars. Cougars are a vicious, constant threat in this area, and it can be extremely stressful trying to get around without accidentally stumbling upon one. Even when you're specifically hunting for them, they often track you better than you can track them. Because there is a lot of brush in Rio Bravo, cougars have a lot of place to hide, and it's not always easy to spot them before they attack. But the worst thing about cougars isn't even what they do to Marston, but what they do to his trusty steed. Cougars will go right after Marston's horse, and there's no getting it back if it gets killed. You'll probably remember Ridgewood Farm, whether the name stands out to you or not. In Spare the Rod, Spoil the Bandit, Marston, Marshal Lear Johnson, and his 2 deputies set out to find a gang of bandits that have been terrorising the area. What they find is a couple of campsites littered with slaughtered people and livestock. Eventually, they follow the trail to Ridgewood Farm, where the barn is absolutely full of unspeakable atrocities. This is perhaps the most cruel and violent scene that Marston sees, at least in the events of Red Dead Redemption. Blood is everywhere in the barn, with even more slaughtered animals and a single stripped body hanging lifeless from the rafters. It seems like everything in this barn has been brutally killed, except for a young girl who pleads for help. It's great that she survived, but looking at the state of the rest of the barn, what must she have gone through to keep her life? John Marston's entire life is filled with people who seem to know him a lot better than he wishes they did. And one of the most striking examples of this is a nameless man who appears in the I Know You string of Stranger side missions. The man speaks knowingly of Marston's life and experiences, including the specific names of people killed during Marston's time with Dutch's gang. The stranger also seems to know a great deal about certain events happening nearby that will test Marston's morals.
I hear that an old nun is traveling from the monastery, taking the money she raised to the bank. Why don't you head up there and see if you can lend her a hand? Road's full of thieves. Either that or rob her yourself.
The stranger makes references to Marston being judged for his actions, and refers to himself as an accountant of sorts.
I'm an accountant.
What all this means is a bit cryptic at first, and it's never truly explained. But when Marston talks to the strange man at Beecher's Hope, repeatedly marks that this is a fine spot.
This is a fine spot.
And then there is this exchange.
Damn you!
Yes, many have.
If all of that wasn't suspicious enough, this is the only stranger side mission that cannot be done as Jack Marston. Perhaps because by that point in time, the stranger has already collected on that particular account. Tall Trees is an area that introduces you to the grizzly bear, which is basically the cougar of West Elizabeth, and it is certainly unnerving to be constantly on edge for them. But that's not really what makes Tall Trees unsettling. In fact, there's not really just one reason it's as disquieting as it is. The lonely, isolated atmosphere is certainly part of it. Tall Trees is a beautiful area, but also a foreboding one, and having to climb on snow-covered cliffs to get anywhere is as unnerving as it is dangerous. But the music is perhaps the difference between Tall Trees being a normal area and an unsettling one. It's subtle, but the wailing quality of Tall Trees' music just makes it feel like it's a place you're not supposed to be. Tall Trees also happens to be an area that you see a lot of during the darkest times in Marston's journey, while he's acting directly under the thumb of Edgar Ross and the federal government. Nothing feels right at this point, and the unforgiving atmosphere and music really drive that home. These are a few of our creepiest things in Red Dead Redemption, but we want to know what events or locations had you spooked in the Wild West. Tell us about it in the comments below, and as always, enjoy the game.